welcome our guest today, Jonathan. So, Jonathan, would you like to introduce yourself, a little bit of your role, your company, and then we can dive in on some of the tangible things that we're thinking about?
Yeah, I'm Jonathan. I'm based in Copenhagen, so I'm working for Planday, which is a subsidiary of Xero, a much larger company in the payroll space. And I am our product operations principal. So the Planday team has a smaller product ops function than the Xero team does. I work kind of across all of our different product and engineering departments. So I work with our department leads in data engineering, product management, also customer support and experience design, like research, etc. So yeah, my role is very multifaceted, especially because it is kind of this interesting mix of a smaller company. We're about 300 people operating within about a 4,000 person kind of larger domain. And obviously, there's a lot of expertise and different ways that we want to work, given that we're kind of two independent companies, but also work very closely with each other. So yeah, it's a lot of fun in the role, but also it is kind of many hats at the same time.
Wow, that's quite complex. Well, anything in the payments and finance and are not easy, not only internal and also external. So, what are some of the product areas that your company has and your area cover as well?
Yeah, so Planday is a time attendance and scheduling software. So we work with smaller businesses in their scheduling, like rotas and shift scheduling. Generally, that's going to be hospitality or some businesses that have kind of hourly workers, something like that. And we also work across some different industries, especially because Xero, the parent company, works mainly in the SMB sector for more broadly payroll. So the product areas, there's a mobile app, there's a web app. There's actually a surprising amount of legacy. So Planday has been around for over 20 years, which is pretty crazy when you think about kind of success stories of smaller companies. They've been acquired about 5 years ago, a little bit less. And yeah, so that means that we've got, from a product perspective, some tech that is legacy, some product areas that are legacy, some processes that are legacy, but also a lot of new. So recently, there's been a ton of changes, both in leadership and in strategic direction. So a lot of the role that I was brought in to do is to help us execute in that kind of new strategic direction. Basically, they're saying we kind of know what we want to do, and we think that we have the right things and the right people in place, but we actually can't necessarily just turn on the car and go. Like, obviously, there's a lot of challenge, whether it's change management or it's actually just figuring out the root causes of some friction points and reasons why things don't work the way they're supposed to work. And that's a big part of my role, kind of detective work to figure out how we can go from strategy to execution.
Very interesting. You mentioned a couple of things I want to double click on because I think it's really relevant to managing product and also the roles of product operations. One of the interesting thing you mentioned is you have a pretty good complex product already, and then it's also part of the Xero subsidiary. Now Xero is in a different continent altogether. So do you work with them closely, or do you have lots of dependencies, or you're somewhat separate and you're mostly just doing API integration?
Yeah, so we actually operate pretty independently of the Xero product. I think the teams interface a little bit more at a leadership level and kind of from a making sure that we're working in the same direction. But as far as the product is concerned, they're one of our partners, obviously a very close partner, but we work across a lot of different other payroll providers as well. So the integration with Xero is, I would say, more of a standard integration compared to how we would look at ourselves as a kind of standalone product. That being said, ways of working and ways that we do product development are pretty interestingly similar. I would say we want to learn a lot from them. They are executing super well. They've also had a lot of changes in their kind of leadership and execution paths. So learning how they do their portfolio management and how they do their planning and kind of review. And we're going through a lot of the same processes at Planday as well.
So let's dive right in because you mentioned quite a few things of the changes happening right now. The product's been around for a while, and there are also changes that want to be made both on the product side, maybe the ways of working side, and product ops is coming into bridge. So not a bridge, right? The transition from a strategy to product and the portfolio. So tell me a little bit more of that journey. What has been working? What was the thesis your organization was thinking? What are some of the challenges?
Of the things that's maybe worth touching on is the Planday product is working well. It is simply in this time of transition about reaching a new level of profitability and kind of ironing out some ways of working and really kind of honing the machine, if you will. And that is obviously very biased, right? That's the kind of problem that I find most interesting, and that's very product ops specific. But that's one of the things that we do struggle with, especially because there is a kind of things have been working in a certain way. And so when we try to recreate or to optimize the way that we're doing product development or the way that we can take an idea from a concept in a slide deck or in a strategic pitch down into kind of an individual sprint or kind of a quarter by quarter process, it's actually a little bit more difficult for us to do it well than we would hope, especially given the size of the company is not as big as it could be. So, for example, we say, okay, we want to do this in a very outcome-led way. We want to have kind of the way that we do product research and continuous discovery and all of these kinds of underlying principles of our product building. We want to do them in the right way. Yet, when we get into the details, it's pretty often that we can find ourselves kind of doing it in the old way, in the bad way, whether that's yeah, it's just not what we want. So I think that's something that is more difficult in practice, and that change management, figuring out why we are perhaps struggling in some of those areas to become an outcome-led organization or to have this visibility of our portfolio in a way that doesn't feel like individual solutions and kind of what's the deadline and what's the release date of this. I think that's tough, especially when we want to do it with a kind of reasonably lean and reasonably small organization.
So you have a not a tiny, right? So it's a compared to some of the companies, bigger, but a couple hundred people is not super tiny. So as you're changing the way you're doing, the main goal is to be more efficient and faster. So how do you see the connection of the new ways of working and then being more efficient connect together so that, potentially be some way that your team are more open to change? Or what is the mandate sort of like become from an output to outcome?
The way that I view it is kind of two main big positive changes of making that transition happen. One of them has to do with much more autonomous teams. So basically building a sense of self-direction to have the teams translate what the outcome that they're trying to achieve, or basically the reason they exist, the purpose that they're trying to kind of drive. If we can get that in a really effective way, trickled all the way down from kind of high level strategy into a trio, which is going to be our kind of core unit of the product team, then they are just set up for success in a way where we're going to see much more consistent good product development, kind of like positive return on
Right.
investment there. That's one side. The other side, I would say, is much more creativity and innovation, especially when we look at these kind of super fast-paced days with AI and with both new development practice, whether it's coding tools or just implementing. We have a lot of agentic work that's going into our product. There's a lot of kind of interest in staying in front of the loop and also differentiating using these technologies, especially because of our parent company. And that is nearly impossible to do in your kind of slow or much more kind of top heavy execution or delivery management. And so I think the way to make that outcome oriented process be really kind of desirable from everyone's perspective is to say not only are we going to have more autonomy and teams that are driving themselves in a much more consistently successful way. I think the consistency is the big part for me, but they'll also be much more nimble to do things in a way that we wouldn't have done otherwise.
Right. Brought on a few things very interesting because companies operate for a variety of reasons. Obviously, there's a culture. There is also sort of the ways of working defined, and also all the things that support it, regardless of your org structure, reporting structure, or how you measured, and down to what tools you're using, because it all drive to how one thing's done in one way or another. So as you're making that change, what kind of like operational aspect, in addition to say, hey, we want to be outcome focused, we're going to have a triad. Um, what are some of the changes you are thinking or making, and how has been?
One of the stories that's been actually pretty um, s- successful and interestingly non-linear has been using a different road mapping process. So we still have a lot of our day-to-day road mapping done in tools like Jira, and honestly, the teams themselves are working in different tools, some of them in Miro, some of them in slides, etc. But different from our kind of source of truth of the product roadmap, the way that we talk about the roadmap and the way that these kind of stakeholder sessions, whether it's on a quarterly or monthly or even yearly basis, those roadmaps have I've been pushing for us to transition into a more outcome kind of oriented roadmap, basically a framework that instead of talking about deliverables, talks about the why. And we tried it last year with varying levels of success, where really I think the big learning was it's great in theory, but the minute we got into prioritization and talking about if we do this instead of this, or if this needs to be shortened or lengthened or whatever it is, it immediately got down into solution level again. And the challenge for us was to basically train ourselves, especially at a leadership level, to not have solution conversations, but to have outcome conversations. And what we've done this year, we're kind of in the midst of our planning process now. And this framework I can't tell you if it's fully successful, but so far it's been really well received. It's adding a few layers of altitude that we didn't have before. So kind of lower level, lower altitude than a goal or an outcome on a quarterly basis, actually called like an assumptions layer or something similar to that, where we're basically calling out the why are we deciding to focus on this opportunity space. So especially with a product like ours, we've got so many options of what could be improved or what area is kind of, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit to pick from, but also the decision of what to work on is really critical with our focus kind of challenge. Like if we are spreading ourselves thin, then we end up not moving the needle in the way that we need to. And so making that clear of saying, this is not a great opportunity area, and here's the MRR uplift that we could see, if we were to do something like this, it's instead saying why this particular opportunity within this kind of overarching goal that we're trying to drive. And we can kind of then connect the dots to say, if this is the outcome we want to hit, for example, this kind of change in our users' behavior, or let's call it just a better user experience, then we can say we have a underlying assumption that this area is going to be the biggest area for us to make a change. And within that, we can see that this part of the product or this kind of slightly getting closer to the solution space, like this more tangible thing that we want to work on is going to be the highest leverage way to accomplish that. And then we can center the conversation, especially with stakeholders at that lower level, without getting into how long is this going to take? What is the kind of risk of this particular project? And it's less of a project mentality and more of a kind of outcome related conversation. So that's been maybe the training wheels for our outcome roadmap.
Also, you're making a little bit more progress towards breaking down broader outcomes, business outcomes, to a different lenses of outcomes, sounds like. And so allow me to indulge on this topic a little bit because I was hearing a lot of these from different companies and customers. What I heard and also observed is this, right? You often company will have goals and a vision. Then at the very end of it is the stories and tasks. So in the middle, there's a lot of transitions. So what's happening is it's not like a door, it's a kind of on and off door, right? It's a switch. It's actually gradient to that way. So there is from a goals to business strategy to product strategy to high level solution, which is a hybrid of the outcome of the solution, and then you have a solution, and you to like a epics or features, and then you have work. So each level and the change and transition actually is a transition. So a lot of times what I heard people is like, we have a vision, we have goals, and then we want to give the team to do that. And that's really tough because in the middle, the context and assumptions are different. Is this what you're describing? And I try to kind of adding a more sort of in the middle to transition from a nebulous, anything could happen for that to some way to say, okay, anything could happen, but we're going to take 2 or 3 paths so that we're moving towards that within that path, within the lane, right? The strategic
Yeah.
direction.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's very spot on. And it's what we see as one of the challenges there is it's basically creating that autonomy of the teams to have that middle language, that middle layer where everybody can agree, and then the autonomy can work from there. The kind of
Right, right.
self-empowered team can operate from that perspective.
Right. That definitely is a key vehicle for a lot of companies, even going through like innovation as well. Regardless of the innovation autonomy, if you don't have a strategic guardrails, just like AI, they will just go hallucinating, right? So it's really
Yeah.
they start to do things that you didn't really intend it to be because they don't have the guardrails. It's great to hear you're doing that. Now, the challenge coming with that is often that one is you never really know how much you need to invest to go even to the middle rail, right? So sometimes you need a lot more than you thought. Sometimes you need a lot less. So that's the first part. We've seen that. The second one we've also seen is that dependencies, because maybe you have a lane and I have a lane. We're all solving different sort of the problem space, but sometimes you have dependencies. How do you see this? How do you manage that?
Yeah, and this is something that we haven't sorted out fully. I think what one of the benefits, I guess, of the super waterfall kind of project oriented approach is that these dependencies can be called out very early in advance. I guess that's why the most risk kind of averse technologies use that process. But what we're trying to do at least, and what we're in starting early stages of doing is centering on the let's call it this kind of middle altitude layer where we can say this is the length of time that we're basically willing to take a risk or kind of give the reins to the team to now operate within this goal, within these guardrails, like you said. And then we have to have enough process in place and kind of good best practice that the teams can unblock themselves and the dependencies will surface and bubble up naturally and automatically. And my view here so far is that actually the dependencies are like the teams are much better at unblocking themselves and at bubbling up dependencies when they're given the space to execute than we oftentimes think they are. So I think that has been pretty successful when there is a clear direction, there is room and kind of the firepower and the fuel to go there, then they can start to actually just unblock themselves and work collaboratively as the different teams do.
Right. Yeah. So sounds like you have the middle ground. You do have sort of the middle, some company call it quarter planning, but you do have some sort of the time to say, okay, you go off to innovate or figure out and to sort of have more full autonomy. But then as a part of the process, you would be able to not understand how you're going to solutionize the things you are being built, also understand what it requires, then you can have a portfolio wide, some sort of collaboration or alignment so that you can solve that dependencies and other needs. Is that what you're
Yeah.
referring to? Okay. Now, as you were talking about innovation and AI and new technology, how does it impact your existing team and how does it fit into your sort of do you see changes in your operating process or what are the things you're thinking about?
Short answer, a lot of changes. I think that one of the ways that I'm actually very excited about having AI fit into the product ops lens is because we've got on the development side, of course, a lot of AI, and we're big users, especially on the development side. On the product management side, tons of AI. Also, kind of pick and choose your favorite AI product management tool. What I'm curious to see how it will flesh out, and I'm actually hoping to be able to implement some of this in my practices, is an AI kind of agentic way to translate strategy a little bit more in that middle layer between our kind of strategy stakeholders and our execution stakeholders, and also to help research and a lot of the kind of knowledge that exists in the organization to be better equipped in a day-to-day fashion where like the misunderstandings on one hand would be done by basically sorted out by a kind of like a living persona, if you will, a trained, very constrained AI that's built around our strategy, that's trained on our strategy, and is basically the translator from a kind of chat perspective. And then you could also do the same with all of our research repositories, all of our kind of personas and our ICPs, and that way we really not only reduce the friction of accessing that information, but also enable these autonomous teams. I think you do still need those kind of guardrails in place to have the teams want to use this information. But then basically the magic is in their fingertips to access as deep of a user persona, as deep of a strategy persona as they can. And to me, that's a nice ops angle because it just basically gives a better kind of playground for people to do their work. And if we've set up the team for success and we've focused in the right direction, it will also lead to higher output in a consistent way, as opposed to being kind of a sporadic, we hope good stuff comes out of this. If we've done the foundation right, this actually will lead to better outcomes.
How do you see across from the very beginning of the strategy and all the way to outcome? Because we covered a few things. We covered a few sort of like from strategy to solution. There were not as last year it wasn't as optimal. So you added the middle layer that seems to be helpful, giving the guardrails. And then you also talk a little bit about how the teams figured out their dependencies because they have a sort of a set timeline, so they can somewhat figure out solutions, figure out dependencies, and then work it out themselves. So now with the ones you're mentioning, seems to be something different. It seems to be solving slightly different need. So tell me a little bit, what's the thought process on this AI and also thinking about how like from a strategy again to the very end driving impact, where you see the spectrum of things the product ops today are covering or product ops want to cover more.
There's just a lot that product ops can cover these days, especially because tooling and practice is kind of the way of working is so in flux. So I think there is a very natural sense of ownership or a desire to support as product ops in ways of working from strategy to execution. So how do we turn strategy into our kind of into an understandable way that has guardrails that's going to be an effective strategy? How do we then build based on that strategy using AI or using these different kind of augmented tools? The best practice and the way of working, I think product ops can support a lot in that whole kind of cascade. It's a bit of the Wild West, so I think any support there has been, I think, kind of something that just a company can really benefit from, and product ops is very well equipped to do that. I'm also in a pretty, I guess, unusual position in my position in my role specifically because I actually don't report to the product org, but I report to our operations org. So that's been super crucial for me, but I think that also changes my scope a little bit in the sense that what I'm hoping to achieve is less about building the best product, but building the best product consistently and having an ROI on our product org, kind of almost reporting into the P&L. So I think in that realm, my kind of view of what product ops can accomplish is super broad because it
Right.
spans the entire side of that organization.
I like how you actually reporting to a different role because the product ops is not just the product. And I think that's one thing we also trying to educate people on. Product is more than product managers. Product management is more than product managers. There's a huge
Yeah.
confusion to think about product operating model equals to product ops. Product equals to product manager. That's not true, right? Product management covers all different functions.
Yeah.
Start from executives, right, to definitely product managers design the triad for sure. But then you also think about a product ops delivery managers, engineering, go-to-market team, support. They are all part of the product management. It's the amount of the effort they get involved directly in the product development is different. But who's not going to train customer? Who's not going to support customer? Who's
Yeah.
not having customer adopted and having problems or needs and gaps? So that whole part is product management, right? So that's why we call it strategy and product and portfolio that cover together as
Yeah.
product management.
Right.
Something you mentioned is very interesting because you're talking about consistently quite often.
Mhm.
Different way to think about it. Sometimes consistency is to reduce the noise, to reduce the overhead, reduce the waste, reduce the um, cost. The other way to think about consistency is that to make it faster because you have less friction. There are also sometimes that people would think about consistently slightly different angles. So tell me a little bit the focus on consistency.
Glad you caught that. That is probably the distinction that I make between basically the product development function, the product management function, and product ops for me. It's on how do we do this not just once, not just as a one-off. Um, I I focus on to me the word consistency is saying how can we set up our teams and our process and everything from this strategy to execution kind of cascade, or even you could go bigger or smaller, but how does that entire system not rely on individuals who are kind of getting lucky, if you will, or happened to do it right that time, or happened to be really creative and successful, or fight the current or whatever it is, basically to say, how do we set up that whole system for success and treat it with all the respect that it deserves? It's not, a bunch of machines moving in, it is a creative process, but I think that if you can break it apart into its constituent pieces and really use best practice all the way through, then the consistency is no longer one of do we have the right people in the room and have we galvanized them around some mission? Cool, now everybody go do their thing. Fingers crossed, we hope it works. It's more saying like, what does this role even entail? Do they have a clear job description? Like, who's training that role? Are we treating that with respect? How does our leadership team make day-to-day decisions? Like, what is the cadence of our weekly leadership? Kind of what's the function of that forum, and how do we see that things are quote moving smoothly? And I think once you get into that kind of well-oiled machine realm, then you can really start to turn up the gas with innovation, with driving better outcomes, with making people also have a really nice time at work and enjoy their work because you kind of take the messiness out of there, and then all of a sudden the output, the kind of creation of the work is a lot more consistent and consistently good.
Right. Interesting. So, what you're talking about is a sort of like operating playbook or some sort of organizational memory by doing things so that you already like learn what's working, what is not working, what is essential, so that you already adjust it from a system perspective, so that when it comes to practice, not everyone has to do it for the first time, go through the learning curve, right? So something like that.
Yeah, that's absolutely it. And I think the only thing I can say to caveat that is I don't think there's a one size fit all playbook, or if there is, I'd love to see it. Um, so I think for me, it's about how do we partner with the leaders, especially in the organization, to have the different department heads, if you will, do that themselves. So the consistency is not one person with, a million plates in the air. I could never kind of help that happen for an organization, even one that's not enormous. But to have the department head say, "Hey, your role is to basically also ensure consistency, and my role is to show you what's working and not working and help you do that," then we can basically scale up that operational, that systematic process a little bit more kind of sustainably, if you will.
100% agree with you. There's no way you have a single playbook that covers all the details, but at a different level, you would have a operating philosophy. That playbook at a different level should have some consistency, and then you revisit it. And I'm always joking with the people to say, the way you're looking at the AI and agent today, it's a much easier to think about organization because the agents will have a guides, have a goals, and have the guardrails, have tools. And if you think about that, it's very similar to human because it's basically built sort of the mirror of how human and organization work, right? In many ways, like that. So I think it's a kind of cool. In some ways, it's easier to explain to people. At least for me these days, I think sometimes it's easier to explain. People say, "Hey, why you need a system? Why you need a data? Why you need a
Yeah.
context?" It's the same. Human and AI in some ways are similar in terms of how you reason,
Yeah.
how you achieve your goals. Because AI is mostly goal based, right? All your
Right.
agents is that you are a XYZ. Your goal is this. The outcome based is actually hopefully helping us moving
Yeah.
towards that direction through that perspective. Um,
Yeah.
there's something, so it's very interesting. There's something you mentioned. The reason I'm highlighting consistency, it's very interesting because I just had a guest recently and he highlights about just about consistency, it's about clarity. So that's
Mhm.
why I kind of double click on it. I look, I think obviously these words can be expand and adjust as well. But the principle behind it is you do have a somewhat of a consistent in a way, at least you can expect what coming in and out of whatever is the process or people or whatnot. It's like if you're agent to agent, people to people, similar, that should be somewhat of expected behavior or process that are inputs and outputs. I think that is very key in at least we know who does what, how do we measure our outcome, how do we plan, how do we build a software, how do we get customer impact. So there are a couple of things I want to also highlight, double click on a little bit. You mentioned that you have a goals, you create intermediary goals, you have this triad and start to do their thing and innovate and test and vibe, whatever, all the good stuff. I think there's no problem ever at the triad side, right? The challenge is all the other side. It's not because the triad does not align to strategy, is there are many goals, and then there are different types of goals. There's the
Yeah.
innovation goals, there's strategic goals, there's the platform, and there's user experience goals, there's the revenue goals, so that there's the new customer conversion and the sales conversion, there's existing customer upsell and the downsell, and then all these are competing priorities. So
Yeah.
when it comes to strategic alignment, the chances are everything they do would align to strategy in some ways,
Yeah.
in most cases. So how do you see that? Does it happen to your organization? How do you manage it?
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest kind of misconceptions almost, or at least I see points that our strategy makers, our strategy evangelists are oftentimes not willing to realize how important it is to kind of decide between competing priorities. And I think that that is just one of those age-old challenges of until we say we don't want it all, we're going to have teams that will pick and choose between this menu of options, this menu of all. And again, when we talk about consistency, to me, it's saying perhaps that the teams may choose within the menu things that end up making the business happy and making, rainbows and butterflies and things are successful, but it's not going to be consistent until we can go from this enormous kind of larger focus of we want everything basically to then say we will have a much more pragmatic view of this is exactly what success would look like for us as a business. You figure out, at whatever altitude you're at, figure out what the best version to get there looks like. Then consistency is much more likely because they are a lot less competing of priorities. It's much more of a single goal focused directive. Now we have to go figure out what that means for our level of altitude, if you will.
Right. It's interesting you said that because I can see both argument, right? Because there's no business would have just one goal, just like
Yeah.
if humans or anyone. You will by default have many goals. So in some ways, it is important. That's where I think it's not a handoff. Here's the thing, go figure it out. I
Yeah.
think that strong collaboration and iteration, that's where going to the realm of the portfolio management, right? Because almost all the things that people come out to do has a reason and then make a business impact. Almost, right? There's very rarely something that makes no sense. I think the teams are pretty experienced to get to that level. The challenge we often see here is to say, what is the sequence? Sequence actually is it's probably the most important aspect in portfolio management and running
Yeah.
organization. So how do you guys decide if that's something like I have 10 things we need to do, all tied to different goals. I have to say which one. I can only do one thing at a time. So its decision is really around the sequence. It's not like I don't do it.
Yeah.
So how do you guys decide? Is there something that you focus on, or it's something where still to be figured out?
No, yeah, no, it's a great point that you call out, and there's no pretending that we have one goal, and that life was that simple. If only life was that simple.
No,
But
no, I
yeah,
don't think you have only one goal. I think more of it's just that we all wish there's a one goal per team.
right.
One goal
Yeah.
per team, that would be
Yeah,
nice.
that would also be nice. Yeah. Has been really effective as a first step for us because I think it is kind of a learning process, especially as you kind of have to start seeing what's working and then do more of that, especially kind of at a zoomed out level. But one thing that's been really effective for us is to just call out these competing priorities, call
Right,
out the different goals in this kind of finding the right altitude for that and the right place to put it in the right kind of portfolio view is also super effective, which is a core problem that you guys are solving. But I think that just saying, hey, here are the four parallel streams or parallel kind of work streams that this one team is working on within this one quarter, and a few of them are very aligned, a few of them are actually pretty disparate, and we're just going to put them all on the page. That has really enabled not only better conversations, both between the teams and their stakeholders, where they're kind of able to say, now you can see why this is taking longer or why we need more resource or whatever it is. It also actually just enables much more, I guess, kind of, for lack of a better word, reasonable conversations at a prioritization level, because this menu is no longer a menu of all of the options, all the things we would like. It's a much more constrained menu of the goals that are all on the page.
right.
And the picking and the choosing becomes much more kind of constructive and tactical at that point.
It looks like you tried a few things. Some of them working better than the others. Some are for like more iterations on how do you get the team work together, and what are the things you have tried that you haven't really figured out? And that's, sort of the not long term, the problem is the more tough to sort it out.
Yeah, I think that is very much looming on us is I think a way to incentivize our kind of to create innovation and create basically to at least from my thinking here, it's if we want to, and I'm coming at this kind of from an innovation theory perspective and a little bit less of software delivery specifically and more just around kind of innovation in general. It's how do we give a little bit more space and kind of not slow down, but give a little bit of open space for basically roadmaps to have a little bit of extra buffer for teams to start to chase their own goals and to create opportunity that's a little bit less of this kind of predictable delivery and more of, I would call it something like goal-driven creativity. And it's kind of applying a little bit of that startup mentality of this kind of self-run team that's saying, what can we do to reach our biggest goals without much more kind of lower altitude stuff in the way. And I think that's just tricky because what we see is when the predictable delivery starts working and when the roadmaps start being executed on in a more consistent fashion, we kind of just want to put more into the roadmap. Like it's very difficult to zoom out a little bit and to say, how do we do this from a longer term sustainable perspective to maybe beat our competition, not because we released all of the features that we were hoping to and they were all excellent, but because we released features we weren't even expecting to. And because we were able to, I don't know, do something completely unexpected that was 100x, what anything that we could have predicted. And that to me is something that's especially difficult at a time when we're craving consistency and craving predictability, but is one of those looming threats that I look around and I look at our competition. It's much smaller, much more nimble, but also much more focused in that way that I think we will need to build that muscle in order to compete consistently with them.
Right. In the end, everything has to be measured in a way that it's meaningful to the business. When there's no measure towards something that is meaningful to the business, that is very difficult to drive the roadmap investment, right? Everything your team does or your product team does is a cost until turning to something. So I think sometimes there's a goal, and then you do all the work. All of these are all cost until the thing goes live, get adopted, and turn into a business impact.
Yeah.
Then until then, it's all cost. That we always have arguments. Sometimes people think about product teams, the product organization are cost. That is true if there's no measure and accountability on the other side of the product. And I think the innovation is the other part is like, sure, we all want to like going to the gym, but eventually if the the end of the other side is meaningful enough, it's very difficult to get through, like you said. It's a great conversation, a lot of cool stuff you guys are talking about. If we were to just kind of sort of like a one takeaway or like sort of the magic moment last question is this. You did mention a few things. You want to build some tools and AI and try to make the process easier, drive more consistency. But if we would take a step back a little bit more, so look at your organization today, and you've done a number of things to make it faster, outcome focused, and more autonomous, and drive other improvement and so forth. What are the things that are not quite there yet? And if you would have, what is this? And the second one is if you have a magic wand to make it happen, what would be that?
Going to be the same answer every time you can fast forward 15 years. I may be, in a different place in my life. I think it'll still be the same answer. Separating signal from noise, distinguishing what are the things that actually matter, the signals that we should act on, and then acting on them, and letting the noise basically filter through. That is something that we struggle with consistently. It's something that I think everybody struggles with in some form or another. Some people are exceptionally good at it, and they're great people to keep around. But I think that especially when you're in kind of a change management environment like myself, or you're looking a little bit more at organizational orchestration and stuff like that, separating signal from noise, there's so many signals, or there's so much that could be signal and noise, that is a crazy skill to have. And I think it's also something that I really do wish there was a tool that I could just kind of snap my fingers and say, great, I have my dashboard directly in front of me. These are the lights that I need to care about. This one's blinking. The rest fades into the background. If I had that, I think the world would be so much easier to handle.
What do you mean? The Dragonboat does exactly that. You didn't know that? You follow us that long? You mentioned something very interesting, so we can wrap up this. I think it's a great conversation, especially signal from noise. And this question come out throughout my career, as well as especially as you progress in, your responsibility gets bigger, that you have even more noise that may be signal for different people that become a noise for you, right? So the idea really is the context, the operating context of the individual. and in a row, and then in the end it's the big picture versus how this fit into the big picture. So I think that's where you said the word dashboard, and the other word I want to use is the context. These things are important for everyone because when you don't have, it's not just you, it's everybody has a noise problem, right? So if they don't see their big picture in the realm of a bigger picture,
Right.
then they don't really know, is that a noise? Is that a signal? So having that context of a bigger picture, it's the same as you have the lane, right?
Yeah.
It's where you really help people to solve the signal from noise thing. But it's really cool to hear that you highlight the same challenges a lot of us are facing, and then hopefully you'll find a way to solve it sooner than later.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Completely agree. Completely agree.